In this episode of the Sam Oldham podcast, I'm joined by Catherine Mills, the incredible young lady behind the MAGNASTICS Twitter account. She's a specialist in men's artistic gymnastics. We had a conversation earlier this year in the lead up to the Olympic Games. I decided to get Catherine back on the show so we could discuss the Olympic Games that just happened in Paris, but also talk Japanese gymnastics. There's been some Japanese competitions this weekend, and have a look ahead to the next Olympic cycle with some big new rules coming in. So, Catherine, thank you for joining me this morning.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
How are you, Catherine? It's been a big year of gymnastics. I don't know whether you feel like me. After the summer, I kind of needed a bit of a break from all of the competitions. Maybe you don't feel that way, but now I'm kind of back ready to get stuck into gymnastics again and looking forward to 2025.
Yeah, I mean, the Olympics was very full on. But then last weekend, as you said, was the Japanese competitions, and they were like, our time, they were like in the middle of the night. So I was like up in the middle of the night watching them. Yeah.
Did you enjoy those competitions, Catherine? Because I remember that we had you on the podcast after last year when some of those competitions had taken place, and you were sending me, you were very kind and sent me a link that I could watch those competitions, because you're right, it's very hard over here in the UK to kind of watch those competitions live, and sometimes the Japanese can be quite secretive about sharing those videos online. Did you enjoy it watching this year? Have you watched much gymnastics in between the Olympic Games and the competitions that happened this last weekend in Japan?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was amazing. So the like end of year Japanese competitions every year, I'm really looking forward to them, because you always know it's something really dramatic's probably going to happen, because it's the end of the year and they're all trying to finish the year on a good note as well. So I was really looking forward to it. And I mean, it was the middle of the night, I was tired, but then it's like you see stuff and then you're wide awake, because like, what did they just do? I don't think I've actually rewatched anything from the Olympics since it happened.
Really, I'm the same. So I haven't really watched. I watched them live, the competitions, but I didn't really rewatch again.
Yeah, I think I've rewatched like individual routines.
Okay.
And especially because I've been posting some stuff about like the new code, like comparing routines and how they're going to hold up and that kind of thing. But I haven't like sat and rewatched the actual like whole thing through. I don't know if I will, because a lot of it was very dramatic. I don't know if I can like take watching it again.
Yeah, it was interesting, right? Because I really, your insight in particular into the Chinese team going into the Olympic Games was maybe at odds with what a lot of people were saying within the gymnastics community. I think a lot of people, including my close friends, we were all on a WhatsApp group and we were talking, and they're not actually former GB teammates. These are guys that I train with at Loughborough University, and whenever there's a big competition going on, we're always chatting, and that group for me is more like fans and former gymnasts.
Yeah.
So we just kind of watch it just for the love of it. And everyone was kind of saying Japan are going to win. And I was like, well, I've had a chat with Catherine, and actually now I'm not so sure. I think the Chinese are going to be super strong. Going into the Olympic Games, you were pretty confident. You felt that Zhang was going to be right up there with Hashimoto, and I agreed with you that it was probably going to be those two battling it out. But you also did point out that Shinosuke was doing some incredible gymnastics, and you felt like he might be the top runner for that third spot. Going into the team, again, you weren't quite sure about Japan and China. You had it quite tight. How did you feel going into the team final after the qualification event? Because I think the Chinese surprised a lot of people, and everyone was kind of, whoa. I know that a lot of my friends had money on Japan to win the team final, and then after the team final, we're kind of like, what happened there? Like, looks like the Chinese are going to dominate.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much, the thing about China is they're a lot more kind of like under wraps about what's going on. So you don't know like how healthy the guys are or like how prepared they are. And then obviously they had one of their gymnasts, Sunway, in podium training got injured, and they had to bring Sueda in. And he's like not got the best track record in team finals. So like I didn't want to get ahead of myself, but I if they both did their best, I thought China would take it. And obviously like they went through the whole way around until high bar, had that massive lead. And I think at that point everyone was like, oh my God, China's definitely going to win. But actually in the team final at Worlds last year, Sueda also fell twice on the exact same skills. So, like, I did feel like they were still going to win, but I wasn't, like, taking it for granted.
Okay.
And then obviously it completely flipped, which is just gymnastics, I guess.
Was there anything that surprised you, Catherine, after qualifications with any of kind of like the gymnastics on the men's side? It could be an individual or a team. Was there anything that you were like, well, I wasn't quite prepared for that? They did really well, or maybe someone that underperformed?
So I didn't know, well, I don't think anyone knew going in that Daiki wasn't in very good shape.
Yep.
He explained afterwards like what was going on, but at the time it was like, oh, something's clearly not quite right with him. Like, you expect him, even when he's not 100%, to like, he comes to these big competitions and like thrives under the pressure almost. But Paris was obviously a completely different story, so that was surprising. But then also afterwards, hearing him talk about it was like, okay, this all like makes sense now.
And just for the people listening, Catherine, what was it that he was dealing with in that competition? Because I was the same. I was surprised with the way he performed in the qualifying, and then even in the team. Look, it wasn't his best, right? Still making mistakes. Every time he stepped up to the pommel horse at that games, I wasn't confident in his performance. He didn't fill me with... I think you can feed up, you can see someone's energy when they step up to the apparatus. You can tell, and there were times where he was taking skills out and doing slightly easier routines. So what was it that he was dealing with? Just for somebody that maybe wasn't aware of that and watched the games and was surprised that, okay, the current world champion is struggling at this Olympics.
Yeah, so he had to withdraw from one of the selection events because of a finger injury. And I think that ended up being more serious than they thought it was. So he couldn't train properly for a really long time. And then I think a few weeks, or I can't remember the exact timeline, but before the Olympics, he sustained a shoulder injury. And again, he kind of said, oh, it's not that bad, like downplayed it a little bit. But I think like that combined with, obviously, like, he's the reigning Olympic champion. He's got all these expectations on him. And I think usually he kind of thrives under that.
Yeah.
But I think because he couldn't train properly, like the physical compounded with like the pressure of it all. And he said he was really not in a good place, like mentally either. Yeah. So I think he actually said he nearly didn't compete at all.
Wow.
That he thought about taking himself off the team because the alternates at least had been able to train properly.
Yeah.
And he hadn't. So, I mean, obviously this is what he's been working towards for 3 years. So the fact that he's even thinking about that is like, shows you just kind of what a like bad place he was in, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And then going into the team final, obviously the Chinese start very, very well and they start building this huge lead, especially when they get into rings, vault. Did you have any inkling that maybe it would go wrong? Because I did, and that sounds great in hindsight, right? But I was just like, no, I'm not sure. Like, there's something that, like, and I think the way it played out in Sue Wade on high bar, and then just seeing the poor guy sat by himself and the other teammates not even kind of looking at him, I was like, wow. I was like, oh, this isn't going to go well for you when you leave this arena. It was, it's interesting that you say that he was in that situation the year before, right? And a very similar thing happened on similar skills. Quite often when that happens, somebody, for that to happen twice, I'm sure for his mentally and his confidence, maybe there's not a lot of coming back from that. But yeah, as the way it played out, just talking again with my friends, it was just crazy. It was like, that men's team final is always the most exciting competition to watch for me. It's just incredible. And then to see the Japanese, and I do think that Kaya in particular is like someone I would always want on my team. Like, he just looks like he'd do anything, like he's going to fight the last inch. And that's something very different from traditional Japanese teams that I was used to growing up. And I noticed that in him when we would train with him every year, when we had our training camps with GB in Japan and we'd go to Cancun in Mexico and we train together. He was just a different type of an athlete, this new generation of Japanese, and showing that emotion. It was an incredible comeback to see. And it certainly was a case of the Chinese throwing it away rather than necessarily the Japanese winning it. So as the competition was going on, Catherine, you obviously got GB, Ukraine, and USA battling for the bronze medal. USA struggled in the qualification, which was, again, surprising for me, but then really did rally and pull it together in the team final. And you kind of had some similarities between Hashimoto, really, and Brody Malone, kind of stepping up for that team final, doing slightly easier routines in places. And I think one of the big routines that stood out for me was probably Fred Richards' high bar routine. I think that was a big moment. And then obviously you've got Stephen on pommel horse to finish it, and he became probably, outside of Simone, the face of gymnastics at that Olympic Games, and certainly one of the memes of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. I think Ukraine did very, very well, but it became clear going into the last rotation they just didn't have enough to be able to battle with USA. And yeah, I think the British team did very, very well. Yeah, I was really impressed, but I just don't think they were strong enough as a team to challenge the US with how well they performed and just how consistent they were as well. What were your takeaways from the competition in that battle for the bronze?
Yeah, so after qualifying, because I know like going in, a lot of people thought USA were the favourite bronze. Then after qualifying, they were like, oh, maybe not. I still thought that, like, if you looked at qualifying, they had a lot more ground to make up than, I know GB obviously also had some mistakes, but I thought if they go out there and they hit their routines, they're still the favourites for bronze. And I think especially once they got past that high bar rotation, obviously Fred's massive routine, like best high bar routine he's ever done. Brody kind of getting that redemption from like the nightmare that he had in qualifying. I think they just really had that drive to, like, because they hit every single routine, which is so impressive. I mean, obviously neither of the top two teams did that. GB had 1 or 2 falls, I think. So yeah, I think they were just really, like, they were ready for it. But yeah, I was also really impressed with GB. They put up a really good fight, which I was really impressed by, especially when, like, as you say, going in, I think a lot of people were pretty confident that USA were the favourites for it. So they made it more of a battle than I think some people were expecting, which was nice to see.
Yeah, I think going into the competition with the way in which they selected the team and the fact that they had gone for Luke, which was definitely a surprise for most people that they went in that direction. I think most people thought, okay, well, they're not focusing on the team. And actually, if the team does well, it's a nice byproduct of the selection that we've made, but we're going for as many individual medals as possible. But actually watching it, I thought the quality of the work that they were doing was brilliant. I certainly think it helped. You know, we had James Hall on the podcast recently. To have a reserve like that is that committed to being the reserve. You know, after that conversation with him and the way he spoke around the games, I was just so impressed with his maturity level and the job that he did for that team. And I think that certainly helped. But yeah, I mean, America, they just had that edge for me. And I don't necessarily think it was even the gymnastics, because I think you could probably put the British gymnasts routine for routine probably up when the whole thing, you put it all together, probably neck and neck, pretty even. But I think it was just that psychological edge. They were just, I think their common goal was that Olympic team medal. And the individual success maybe came afterwards as a byproduct, whereas maybe it was a little bit the other way around with GB, and it was a hopeful that maybe if something happens, we'll be there to take the bronze. But there was an understanding that actually going into this Games for the first time in a very long time, the Americans are probably the favourites on paper. So, yeah, incredible to watch that. And I don't know if you have listened to the conversation we had with Kensley, but the way in which the TV teams and the broadcasting team in America had the Stephen timer on and stuff, it sounds like it would have been a great spectacle to have watched the team final in America and the way it played out for them. A lot of symmetry with obviously the 2008 bronze medal that they won. It was really cool. I think they finished on pommel horse as well, and Sasha Artemov had to do a pommel routine, and it was kind of the same thing, and it just built into this. It reminded me a little bit of London and how it was like this perfect situation where everything just went right, and it can only be a positive thing for men's gymnastics. And I think it probably got a lot more people watching the rest of the all-around competition, the Apparatus finals, because of what Stephen did. So I think he did a real service to men's gymnastics in that team final. And again, it was just a great spectacle for anybody that watched. Let's move on to the all-around final then. What were your expectations going into the all-around final? Were with Hashimoto having the issues that he had? were you thinking Zhang is going to walk this, he's going to smash this competition? I think that's how most people probably felt. And then starts floor, has that almost strange mistake on floor. And then, yeah, for me, the surprising thing was, if you look at Shinosuke's gymnastics on paper, I mean, the execution is incredible, even watching his routines that he was doing this weekend. The difficulty isn't up there with the top guys. So you end up with an Olympic champion that is essentially doing very beautiful gymnastics and technical gymnastics, but not the most difficult, which is quite surprising given that, we're in a world of gymnastics now where the difficulty is just through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Daiki would still probably get a medal, just because he doesn't have to be at his best to be top 3 in the world, for example. Like Worlds last year wasn't as best and he still won. And he started off well, obviously, like he did a good floor routine. I was like, okay, he's here, he's ready. Then pommel horse happened, and I was like, okay, he's like, and you could almost kind of see his head go down in a way that like you don't really see from him often. So I think, yeah, and he didn't have that, like in the team final, he had his teammates to kind of rally around him and boost him up. But I think in the all-around final, like, okay, he's got a teammate out there, but the teammate's focusing on its own competition. And yeah, I think it just kind of got away from him. Zhang, I think I was expecting him to win because, again, he didn't need to be his absolute best to win. I mean, even after he fell, it was like, well, if he smashes out the rest of it, he's still got a chance. Obviously, he did come very, very close to winning still, which I think is a testament to just how incredible he is, that he can fall like on his face and still, come second, really close to first. And then Shinosuke, I mean, he was locked in. Like, I have never seen anyone more like locked into a competition because, I mean, obviously I knew going in he was a likely medal contender, hit all his routines in qualifying, hit all his routines in the team final. And the thing is, he wasn't that consistent at the start of the year. Okay. Like, he obviously made the team, did really well at national competitions, but he was not hitting all of his routines. I don't think he did a single day where he hit every single event. Right. So to see him go out there and just kind of bang out these routines one after the other, I was like, oh my God. It was incredible. I mean, I think I would have preferred, like, you want to see the best gymnasts win. Yeah. And Shinosuke, obviously, incredible gymnast. And as I said before, if everyone does their best, he's top 3. Yeah. I mean, I was very happy for him. It was a shame that obviously the top 2 guys both had difficult days, but he was just like incredible. And a lot of people didn't know who he was before that. And then suddenly they're like, oh my God, who is this guy? Yeah. Where's he come from? And he just completely smashed it. Yeah. Yeah,
it's interesting, right? Like, I think for me, you want to see the best 2 gymnasts battling out at the top. But, as a young gymnast that you said was inconsistent at the start of the year, it sounds like his preparation was spot on. He peaked for the competition he needed to peak at, and he had an opportunity where the door opened for him twice, really. If you're thinking Hashimoto's just not on his A game and is struggling, he obviously trains with him, so he knows that somewhere, that he's not in his best form. And then Zhang has that fall on floor. It just opened up, but you still have to take that opportunity, right? We had the chance to film with Harry Hepworth and Luke Whitehouse a couple of weeks ago in Leeds. We did some filming there, and one of the questions I asked Luke's coach was, how difficult is it to take that opportunity when it's presented to you? Because you still have to go and do it, right? So incredible that he did that. I think moving forward in the future and how I see his career playing out, I'm not necessarily sure that he is going to be the top guy moving forwards. His gymnastics, I think, has a few restrictions in terms of the skills and the difficulty level that he can do. I think he's certainly going to be one. He's going to be in the team, and he's going to be somebody with incredible consistency moving forward, and is obviously someone that can handle that pressure. He's going to have the name. But I would expect to see people doing more difficult gymnastics over the 6 events, and I think it was probably a case of just the perfect opportunity at the perfect time, and he took it. And maybe you don't see him go on to be a champion on the world stage again. I'm not sure. Maybe he does, and maybe there's more gymnastics that he can do. He obviously had that serious injury that he was coming back from, and even when you look at like his some of the skills that he's doing on floor, even now, after the Olympic Games in November, some of the routines, I'm not sure he's got that difficulty to compete with the very best guys in the world. Moving forward, especially when the rules are changing and they're dropping to 8 skills, you're going to have to do even more difficult gymnastics to be at the very top and set yourself apart. He certainly has that execution, and he's got age on his side. But yeah, they were my big takeaways. And then I think Zhao Ruteng is just, that guy is just, he's like a machine. No emotion, just hits. Even to this day, I've watched it for nearly a decade now, but when he does his triple twist on vault, it's just crazy that he walks into it. It just looks like he's walking into it. He's just so consistent, so solid. I think he's got a real mix of, like, it doesn't look like traditional Chinese gymnastics, you know, it's kind of European style gymnastics. I think we see a lot of that now from the Chinese team, especially because we're seeing them do Casinas on high bar, which is something that they never used to do. You know, they would be very solid and they'd do Jaegers and Kachevs for a long period of time. If I'm thinking between 2004 probably up until 2012, you know, it was very rare, other than Zhang Chenglong, that you would see a Chinese team doing Lukins or Casinas and Coleman's and connecting Kovac's. Now they're all doing them again. I think that's changed the way in which their gymnastic style looks a little bit. It doesn't look as traditional Chinese. I think for me, and maybe I'm thinking about Yang Wei in particular, he had a certain look to his gymnastics that was quite machine-like, robotic, consistent, very strong on rings, vault, P-bars, but not so technical on the others. I think that's changed now because they have to try and keep up with the Japanese team, who are incredibly technical, and in the past the Russian team, although they're obviously not in the fold at the moment. How do you see the Chinese-Japanese battle going into the next 4 years? Do you expect it still to be just those two, or do you think actually after this Games and seeing how well the USA did and the fact that the Olympics is going to be in the USA, do you think the Americans could potentially challenge those two for those top 2 spots?
I mean, it's hard to say. The thing about Japan and China is, although they're the top 2 teams in the world, their programs are extremely different because Japan's got all that depth. I mean, like the amount of gymnasts they have, it's crazy. Like they could put together multiple teams. And then China, they don't have as many gymnasts, but the top guys that are going to be going to those big competitions are just like another level. So that's why they're kind of the top 2. I mean, USA, they've obviously got, I mean, Fred coming through and he's only going to get better. I'm not sure what Brody's plans are, if he's going to continue or not. And they've got young guys coming through, and so obviously they'll be very motivated, and this medal will have given them a huge boost. I think it'll probably say that like Japan and China are the ones to beat, but it's not like every single time they always come first and second. I mean, GB beat them in 2015. Beat China. Like they've been challenged before. And I think going forward, probably USA are, if they continue this momentum, as you say. I mean, obviously the goal is to win. You know, bronze is amazing, but that's not, you know, they want to win.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it'll be very interesting. And especially, I mean, I also think China are very, very code smart. That's like they study it. I think I saw a quote from Zhou Jingyuan that like at the Olympics, like when they weren't training or competing on it, he was studying the new code already.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt to it. Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to say. Like,
yeah. And obviously next year we're going to have an individual year, right? So there's no team events, so we'll see how that plays out. I think there's going to be less athletes going to the Worlds next year. I think I heard that from somebody told me that.
Yeah.
So it'll be very interesting. The format, they seem to be playing around with the formats quite a lot, right? In recent years, they've had head-to-heads. They've taken that from the league systems that we have in Germany and France in terms of the team final, which has certainly helped. I think that's made it more of a spectacle because the audience are able to really get a good gauge of, is that routine better than that one? Which kind of helps with understanding the scores because those numbers are so difficult for people to understand. it's quite easy to see somebody go head-to-head on an apparatus and go, well, that score's better than that one, so they must be doing better. And I think that certainly helps. So it'll be interesting to see how these formats change again. We're starting to see online competitions pop up, people trying to offer more prize money for World Cups. The Platinum Leagues happened this past weekend, where it's been a new thing, and they're trying to get gymnasts to compete online, which I think is a brilliant idea, because we need that. We need that innovation in gymnastics, and we certainly need to, I think, as a sport, the fact that Simone Biles brought such a spotlight to the sport, but then we were so lucky to have that incredible viral moment with Stephen Nedorosik on the pommel horse. We have to really capitalise on that as a sport, I think, and make the most of it. With the Olympics being in America and it being an English-speaking country, for the, gymnastics in China and Japan is massive, but we've got a real opportunity to maximise that over the next 4 years as we go into LA, because everything in America is bigger, better, louder, right? So it's going to be that way going into the games. And I think I personally, the advice I would give the American team is, now you've won bronze, make the goal gold. Yeah. Don't not have a goal, because that common goal is huge. And I think I've spoke about this before, but that was the mistake we made after 2012. There was no clear goal. It was just, we're just going to carry on. Whereas if there was a real clear common goal, it would have been some real direction for the program to aim towards. I think they will do that. Let's have a look at the apparatus finals then, Catherine. Let's just take your big takeaways from the apparatus final. Obviously, high bar was an absolute shambles. It was, I still can't believe, as a showcase for the sport, it was just not great. And with so many gymnasts, I mean, falling on dismounts, in my head, you're in a bar final, just put it on your feet. Just put it on your feet. And everybody was like, yeah, it was weird. I don't know whether the bar was slippy. I've not heard anybody say anything. Maybe you have. But let's go through the apparatus just quickly, and just one of your biggest takeaways from each apparatus. So obviously the floor event, somewhat controversial judging decisions in that event. What did you make of floor?
Well, I mean, first of all, I was really happy for Carlos Yulo. I think I said going in, I think people are kind of discounting him a bit because he's been quite inconsistent recently. But that, if he hits the routine, he's, very likely contender for gold. So I was absolutely thrilled for him. And to see him put it together after the nightmare he had at Worlds the year before, at the last Olympics, that was brilliant.
Was it 2 double tucks?
I don't know. I think because it's benefit of the doubt, isn't it? Kind of. So I think, I don't know. I saw someone say that.
Did you spot it straight away, Catherine, when you were watching the routine? Did you spot?
Yeah,
that?
I was a little bit worried.
Yeah.
But I saw someone say that if they might have been more likely to take it if he didn't have a double tuck elsewhere in the routine.
Okay.
So they don't want to completely tank the whole routine composition.
Right.
I don't know, but for me, I was happy for him to win. So, I can see the argument kind of either way.
Yeah.
I guess, and I don't remember what angle the judges had on it, kind of thing. So
what I've heard since is that the panel on the floor and the head panel disagreed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So one went one way and one went the other way. And that's what I heard. And then it got overruled and it stayed, which is interesting because in those biggest moments, I think at the Olympic Games, we've seen what happened in the past with Nemov on high bar, right? The sport's in a spotlight, and you do wonder, sometimes are decisions made because they don't want bad press, when actually, in those moments you want the correct thing for the athletes. I think for me, watching as a gymnast, as a former athlete, you just want consistency, right? I just want consistency. And I think for me, it was a little bit, I certainly left that after the floor final, I just felt a bit, I wasn't completely happy with the consistency of the decisions being made in terms of the judging for that floor final. When you look at Zapata's situation with his straddle, double pike, tuck, landing low situation. Same with Luke then. And the Luke one was interesting because I didn't know that rule. So because I was straight away, I was like, wow, what's going to happen to his D-score? And I wondered whether they didn't give him his wide on because it was too high, because I was trying to work out what would be the difference there. But then I didn't know there was a new rule about landing too deep. You don't get the skill, you lost the connection. But yeah, it was that consistency for me that I was a bit surprised at, because I saw Luke's routine and I thought, he's won. I was like, I think he's done it. So it was really interesting that it came out the way it did. I was certainly surprised, and a lot of other people, but I didn't also know that rule. So I think if you were watching it with a judge's perspective, you would have known that and you would have guessed that straight away. But watching as a gymnast, it was really interesting. Likewise, look, I love Carlos's gymnastics. I love the fact that he spends so much time in Japan. He certainly has that Japanese influence in his gymnastics, and it was amazing for him, amazing for the Philippines. But yeah, my skeptical head was certainly jumping straight to politics and what decisions are being made here, because gymnastics is in the spotlight on the world stage. Let's go to pommel horse then, Catherine. Obviously a big event in gymnastics. This pommel horse final was always gonna, in terms of the press and the media attention, was going to be Max against Reece. What did you feel after watching that pommel horse final? For me, that was probably the most perfect pommel horse routine in an incredibly difficult moment, other than a couple of Chinese athletes and routines that they performed in the past that I think I've ever seen. And I actually feel like I'd be really interested to speak to Reece and ask whether he thinks he'd be able to produce that routine again, because I almost feel like you can only maybe do that once in your life, be that prepared for that moment and get it that perfect. How did you feel about the pommel horse final?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Reece just absolutely smashed it. And especially because Kurbanov had gone before him, because not as many people were talking about him going into it. And it's like, well, actually, he's got more difficulty and he's just as clean. But he'd already gone and made a very small mistake, not done his absolute best. And as soon as Reece did that routine, I was like, yeah, he's won. I mean, great podium. I was for me, the right result based on that final. It was really nice to see Kurbanov hit a routine. I mean, Reece has been really consistent the last few years. And obviously Stephen coming through with the US's only individual medal as well. Yeah, I mean, it was a great final. It was just such a shame about her Woong at being the last routine and falling and being exactly 1 point off a medal. That was brutal to me, because I think everyone was right, most people don't know who he is.
Yeah.
So I saw people saying oh, well, there's no one left who's going to challenge Steve for bronze kind of thing. And I was like, well, he could do. So yeah, I mean, that final, considering some pommel horse finals go a bit more kind of the way the high bar final went.
Yeah.
There were a couple falls, but I think for an Olympic pommel horse final, it was really good quality. Good to watch. Yeah,
and I'm really happy that we got to see Max compete in that final and do another routine and kind of finish on that, given everything that had happened, and then the build up to the games. I imagine, from what I heard behind the scenes and the issues he was having with his wrist, it was probably, if you spoke to him, it was probably the most difficult preparation he's ever had for one of his big major events. So the fact that he was able to go out there and just compete, and brilliant. I mean, what he's achieved for gymnastics in this country is absolutely remarkable. Certainly one of the greatest, if not the greatest, pommel horse worker in terms of medals and consistency in particular. Maybe one of the most consistent pommel horse performers of all time. So yeah, just incredible to see that. I'm glad he had that opportunity to compete in the final. Me personally, I would have loved to have him to had that fairy tale moment and at least finish on the podium. But I think he still had that in his way, and it was brilliant, and it was great to see all the support and everything that he had afterwards. And I'm really excited to see what Max goes on to do next. He's such an incredibly talented person. It's really and he always has a lot of creative ideas. I'm really interested to see what it is that he does now. With his career in the next chapter after gymnastics. But yeah, for me, I'd followed Reece's preparation in the videos he was putting up on YouTube, and it was just, they really, really were trying to hit a perfect routine. And it was just to see that be pulled off in that moment, and you put yourself in his shoes of what it must have felt like, just incredible. And to be, the first Irish gymnast to ever win an Olympic medal, to win a gold, it's going to do it's going to do incredible things for Irish gymnastics. Me personally, I've got my coach Sergey over there in Ireland working as a national coach now. My best friend Andy Smith working over there as a junior national coach. So I've certainly got that connection with Irish gymnastics. I'm really excited to see how it plays out. Let's go on to the rings. Obviously, Yang was the two Chinese were just light years above everybody. Really, really cool to see Petronas get another Olympic medal and finish on the podium. You know, as a guy, he's just an amazing guy. It was really cool to see that for his career arc. Just how perfect are those Chinese on rings? Do you see anybody beating them in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Liu Yang, Zhou Jingyuan, and then even like they got guys sitting at home like Lang Jingyu, like just incredible on rings. And like the thing is, they were up first in the final, and then everyone else went. And obviously, everyone else in that final is incredible gymnasts, like incredible ring specialists as well. But like they just don't compare, especially going after them. It looks like they're doing different sports almost. I mean, they're just so solid. And they do really like difficult and interesting skills. And I think for a lot of people, like rings maybe like not as interesting, not as exciting to watch. And then they watch those guys and they're like, oh, what did they just do? Which is really cool that they're kind of getting more people to like see how cool rings can be. And of course, like both of them didn't have great dismounts either, and they still walked away with it. So
yeah, it's interesting you say that, Catherine, about rings as well, because I actually think that when someone thinks about men's gymnastics that maybe isn't a men's gymnastics fan, the first thing they think about is rings, right?
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that in the new code, because the skills are being reduced to 8, what we're going to see, and with the new bonus system that we'll touch on at the end, we're going to see triple backs on rings and bigger dismounts, which hopefully will make it a bit more exciting. And we'll see those top guys doing more interesting ring skills because you need something that sets you apart. So I'm hoping at some point in the future, there is some kind of originality type rule that comes into gymnastics that people are able to utilize to differentiate themselves, particularly the best top guys in the world. But you are absolutely right. In terms of the positioning, I mean, the Maltese of Yang, and then compare it to anybody else in the fight, it's just not even the same skill. It's so perfect, it almost doesn't look real. It looks like somebody's made it with AI. It's crazy, it's incredible. And I actually thought that in that final, potentially, they would swing the way of giving it to Samir Ait Said, the French gymnast, just because they were in France, they were in Paris, they hadn't won a medal, and I know how essentially we're in a sport, right, where it's subjective, and I know how those things can go, and I actually was a little bit surprised they didn't give it, because I thought he did a really nice routine. Actually, his line is very nice on rings, and I'm still shocked that he's competing, because I thought he was retired, and I'd seen him on a car advert around last Christmas, and I was like, wow, Samir's doing a car advert, and he'd done like a round-off flick straight back on floor, and I thought it was just one of those athletes that's retired. And then I learned that he's going to get the qualifying spot through the World Cup system. So yeah, it was incredible to see that in the rings final, but I absolutely agree. Like, it looks like they're doing a completely different sport. So a great showcase for gymnastics, and I'm hoping that maybe Harry Hepworth, moving forward, could become somebody that on rings can really get people engaged in this country, in Great Britain, with rings and how incredible it is. You know, I've told Courtney before, I was like, Courtney, you really need to market yourself as the strongest man in Great Britain, because, you know, when I go into schools and I talk about gymnastics, kids straight away, oh, the rings, or adults will be like, how do you do the rings? Is that the hardest? It must be the hardest. So there's certainly something there, and I hope that Harry can really do that. Then going obviously into the vault, talking about Harry going into the vault final, it's where we got an individual medal on the vault final, and we have to obviously mention Jake did well, incredibly well, making history on floor with his incredible difficult routine. So yeah, I don't want to miss out Jake, because that was an amazing performance, and I think over the course of the past couple of years, he certainly deserved that, and it was just great that he was able to control those landings with it being such a difficult routine under pressure, and get that second Olympic floor medal after Max in 2016. Just let's talk about vault then. Carlos wins a second gold medal. And again, a couple of people did say, oh, what did you think to his triple twist? Was it all the way around? I didn't agree with that. I thought, yeah, that's all the way around. But when you slow it down, it was a slightly undercooked a little bit and he split his legs, but his vaults were beautiful and he certainly was the best. But that vault final was really interesting with how many gymnasts were doing a handspring 2.5 and a dragolescu. It was almost like all of the best guys are doing those vaults now. What did you think about that vault final?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Carlos's triple twist, he's always a little bit short. It's within the like allowed credit, and I think he does score like considerably lower on that because of that. So I think like the vault goal, definitely, I don't think you can really argue against. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really sure what to expect because in qualifying, like Artur Davtyan, who normally drills his vaults, like barely qualified. So I was like, is he gonna do his vaults well? Is he suffering with something? Like, what's gonna happen there? Harry, obviously, like there were a bunch of guys with similar potential as Harry, but he just absolutely nailed it. I think when the code changed, the past change just gone, like after Tokyo, changing the vaults to allow the same entry. I think like some guys, like Artur Davtyan, for example, like he always had an amazing handspring vault, struggled a little bit with the second vault, but now that he's allowed to do 2 handspring entries, he's like really found that consistency.
Yep.
I think that's the same for a few of the guys.
Yep.
Like if you're really strong with that entry and you can do it for both, why not?
Yeah.
So yeah, and it was really cool to see Alfati from Iran. That was really awesome. I mean, he didn't have his best vault, but it was really great to see him making that history in the final. It was a really great final. I don't think, was there any falls? I don't think.
Yeah, it was a very good vault final, right? Typically in a vault, they
really
can
high quality.
go one of two. It reminded me a little bit of 2012. 2012 was an incredible vault final. People were just sticking everything. That was an amazing final. And I think the quality was brilliant. And obviously for Harry, becoming the first British man ever to win an Olympic vault medal is an amazing achievement for somebody so young. And I think his consistency, particularly over the last 2 years, for the next 4 years, he'd be somebody that I would be, if I was going to be hedging my house on anybody, I'd be saying, look, this guy certainly has the potential. I almost think of him like the British are blazing a little bit. He's that good on free apparatus. He's winning World Cups all over the place and all different types of those free apparatus. I think he really has the potential on vault for sure. He was on the podcast last week. He spoke about really trying to be the person to do 2.6 vaults. He's working on those 2.6 vaults. It seems like his head is straight onto the next code and the new cycle and pushing himself. And I was there with Sam and Leeds filming, and I was gobsmacked at the level of gymnastics they were doing on a cold Friday in November. Just a few months after the Olympics, they were already pushing new skills and new routines and thinking about the new code. So I think that tells you a lot about their ambitions going into the next Olympic cycle. And I certainly expect him to be one of the best vault workers in the world. And again, also Jake as well. Like I think Jake went in as probably more of a favourite on vault to win a medal than he did necessarily on floor.
I agree.
I think, he's obviously the world champion on vault. So going in, I think a lot of people thinking if he lands on his feet, he's probably going to do it. I think Jake is still going to be in there moving forward. And I think, if I was Jake, I think he's going to have some real all-around aspirations in the next cycle. I think he's going to be that guy that becomes a top all-rounder now. I think he's already probably proven himself to be that guy, or the potential to be that guy in the last Olympic cycle. And then there are some guys in our team, right, the GB team, that are a bit older, so will they still be around? Whereas Jake's got that youth on his side, and also there's some areas he can make massive improvements on because he has very solid technical gymnastics. P-bars we'll touch on. P-bars was pretty straightforward, right? That is just the most perfect routine in gymnastics. It's, men or women, it's just incredible, that routine on parallel bars from Zhu. It reminds me a little bit of just how dominant and perfect Uchimura was in his prime. As a specialist and a single routine, that's what Zhu represents for me in that domain, particularly on parallel bars. What's it like watching that routine as a fan?
It's amazing. I see. The thing is, I get really nervous. So he's probably my favorite gymnast at the moment, like currently competing. I get really nervous, even though he always does it. Yeah. I still get really nervous. But yeah, I mean, for me, him doing P-bars, like for me, that's the best gymnastics has ever been done on anything. Like it doesn't get better than that. Like he's doing these difficult skills. He's doing it to absolute perfection. And honestly, sometimes I don't know where they're finding the tenths to take off. Like I feel like he should be getting at least 2 tenths higher than they give him. Yeah. And he actually used to give him higher execution scores. Yeah. And now he's doing equivalent routines and he's scoring lower. Yeah. Which is a bit strange to me. But I mean, I guess it doesn't, like he's going to win anyway. But it would be nice to see that separation from like everyone else, because some other guys will get like execution scores in the 9s. Yeah. And he's getting like kind of 9.2, 9.3, and you think it's not only 2 or 3 tenths better. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I like that, and he's already said he wants to go to the next Olympics. And I think previously he said he might want to go for like 2032 as well. So hopefully we're going to get to watch him for a really long time. I mean, he's got a lot of injury problems, but
yeah, he's one of those he's one of those Chinese gymnasts that's strapped up everywhere, right? You tend to see that from the Chinese, don't you? That they're always taped up everywhere, and you know, I've heard stories in the past of cortisone injections during competitions and stuff like that. So it will just be a longevity thing, because I think to be able to do a routine like that well, the only way you get there is, you know, they often talk about, right, 10,000 hours to become a master. I mean, he's probably put 10,000 hours into that P-bars routine, let alone the rest of his gymnastics. So you just do wonder about at what point does that take a huge toll on your body, because it's also a routine that is not just perfect, but the type of skills he's doing are very physically demanding. To do a straddle front and catch and hang, like the force going through your joints doing that, and the way that he does those skills, that Bavsar, like that's a lot. You know, even doing front upright skills, again, a lot of pressure on your shoulders, your joints, and all of that. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and whether he's going to be able to hold out for that long. I can't see anybody really catching him. Whether or not it brings people closer in terms of pulling the skills down to 8 instead of 10 because he can't get as far ahead, I don't know. But I do agree that it would be nice to see that real difference in execution score, because it might then encourage more gymnasts to focus more on how beautiful they're doing their gymnastics, to see that separation. Because at the minute, you're right, like there's no way there's only 2 or 3 tenths difference between him and the next best on parallel bars. So yeah, that would be one thing that would be nice to see, that trying to see people do the most beautiful gymnastics they can possibly do, and when they do that and they do it successfully, then get rewarded for it, you know. Let's go on to high bar then. Obviously high bar was a case of whoever stays on basically gets a medal. What do you think happened in that final? It was just, for me as a high bar worker, I was just that's the piece I'm looking forward to the most, and it was just it didn't live up to my expectations for sure, and I'm sure most people watching that final.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching with a friend, halfway through she just got up and walked out. She was like, I can't do this anymore.
Oh, no way.
But yeah, I mean, I think there was an interview they showed afterwards with Marios, and they asked him, like, oh, what do you think happened? And he was like, it's high bar. It's just the nature of the event. I mean, it's a metal bar of, like, high up above the ground, and people are throwing themselves around it and letting go. Yeah, the falling on the dismounts was weird. I guess maybe it's just one of those things where, like, people see it happen and it kind of, like, it almost catches. Yeah. Like, they see it and they think, oh, well, I'm not going to do that. And then it, like, I don't know. Yeah, ridiculous. I mean, it was nice that the 2 best guys in the final still got medals, even though they both fell. But yeah, it's just ridiculous. And then you've got obviously Shinosuke, who's like, he's not even one of the best high bar workers in Japan.
No, that's what for me, you know, as an example, he wins the Olympic high bar gold medal on high bar, and he's not even in, as far as I'm aware, he's not even really in contention in Japan or even in the final of the high bar last weekend. So that says a lot about the quality of the high bar final, and that will bring us on next, I guess, to talk about the Japanese team moving forward. But before we do that, Where do you feel this leaves the GB team moving forward into the next 4 years, Catherine? Obviously, there's a lot of change going on where Max is retiring. We're going to have Joe's going to be older. I know he's struggling with some injuries from what I hear at the moment as well. So there's going to be some change. We've got the juniors who are now the junior European champions again. I'm seeing some incredible gymnastics of some of those younger guys. Particularly on high bar in the last few weeks, I'm seeing some incredible stuff. How do you think it's going to play out over the next 4 years with the GB team? And what do you expect from the GB team going into LA?
Yeah, I think they've got like a lot of really good young guys coming through. I mean, with kind of the team at the moment, like it feels like they've got a lot of good like guys who are really good on like a couple of events,
okay,
but maybe aren't so solid like all around, where that kind of leaves some gaps in the lineups where like you maybe have to use someone that like ideally you wouldn't want to use, like that has lower difficulty, which I think also was the case a little bit in Paris. But I think I don't follow the GB juniors that closely.
Okay.
But from what I can tell, they've been having some really good all-around results. So as they come through, that might not be an issue.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, they've clearly got like obviously in London, like whereas the year before you hadn't been in contention, and since then it's just been like every single year in contention for medals. So I think it's going to carry through, and with the juniors coming through, I think they'll continue to be in kind of that same position, I guess.
It's going to be very interesting. I think one thing that I've picked up on is that this will be the first Olympic cycle ever really in a time period where GB have had success, where you're not going to have a specialist on one event automatically essentially selected for teams.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a very different looking team. It's going to be maybe more well balanced because, you know, from 2012, 16, 20, 24, you've always had a pommel horse specialist on the team.
Yeah.
And at times they've been an athlete that is really only bringing a very, very high score to the pommel horse, other than Max, obviously, in 2016, 2020, and also 2012 as well to an extent, but we still had Lewis there that was there as a specialist, right? So it's going to be very interesting, the makeup of the team and how that changes the dynamic. And also, you know, going into those competitions and selections, everybody knew that Max or Lewis is going to be on the team. So there's only really 4 spots that I can go for. Now there's going to be 5 spots, so that's going to be really interesting, I think, to see how that plays out, and maybe whether or not that tradition of pommel horse continues, or it starts to change a little bit. It seems like, you know, traditionally in the past, we struggled on rings. We seem right at the moment not great on high bar at the moment, right? As a team and as a nation, we've not had that much success on high bar, but now we've got a lot of great floor workers, vault workers, like lots of strong, powerful gymnasts. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Because at the moment, I mean, when I was like looking towards Paris, and it's like, okay, we've got like 3 guys who can contend for a medal on floor, potentially even like on vault. I don't remember if Luke did 2 vaults at Paris, but he's got, you know, the 2 vaults. So yeah, floor and vault has been like a massive thing. And then you say a little bit weak on high bar at the moment, but you've seen guys like train the big skill, like coming through with it. So like, it seems like there's like that realization that we have these gaps to fill.
Yeah.
So we need to focus on that, which is really good.
Yeah, I hope as also we continue that tradition of pommel horse workers, because pommel horse is that event in a team competition that can make all of the difference. You know, we've seen that from the USA team, right? So I hope that we continue that, because, you know, you have to be a great all-arounder, to be a great team, you have to have pommel horse workers. Like, you've got to be able to put people up that can get high scores on pommel horse. You know, apparatus like floor, vault, rings, you can get by with a lot of strength and almost muscle your way through sometimes, but the other apparatus relies a lot on technique, and that you need those knowledgeable coaches with that history of teaching those skills and those routines and know how to prepare gymnasts. And I hope we don't lose that, now that maybe Max is stepping away from the sport, and Lewis obviously isn't there, Dan Keatons isn't there. I hope that knowledge gets passed on and we still continue to produce great pommel horse workers, because that's kind of our tradition now and what we've been known for. Let's touch on Japanese gymnastics in a little bit, Catherine. You obviously watched the competition over the weekend in Japan. It's always exciting. They're kind of the one country at the end of the year that have a lot of their big competitions. I guess, what were your big takeaways from maybe the current team that were at the Olympic Games, some of those guys, and then also some of the future stars that maybe, the people listening to this podcast might not know yet, but they should look out for in the next few years?
Yeah, so normally they have their Apparatus championships earlier in the year. Like previously it's been part of team selections. Okay. But they, for whatever reason, didn't want to use that for selections this year. So they moved it. So it was the team championships, which is always at the end of the year. And then it was also the event final championships. The team championships is just crazy because it's like you've got club teams getting scores that would have been like fourth at the Olympic Games, with like a bunch of mistakes as well, because, it's rare that everyone hits all their routines. And like even the competition within, like, so the club that has won the last 3 years is the club that Shinosuke and Sugino Takaki are on. So 2 of the Olympic team members. The competition, even just to make that team for that competition, is crazy. They've got like 12 guys, and probably at least 10 of them were in contention, like not necessarily big contention, but for the Olympic team. Wow. Like you've got guys who come like top 8 all around nationally, and they're not making their club team because the depth is just so ridiculous. So that's always like one of my favorite competitions to watch. And then the event championships is really cool because you see a lot of guys you don't see that often. Okay. Whether they're specialists or like just not making major teams. Yeah. So yeah, it's really good to watch. The guys who are in Paris, so as I said, Shinosuke and Takaki are on the team that won, and then the other 3 are on the team that came second. Okay. And did they all perform well, Catherine? I mean, after Olympic Games, just a few months afterwards, it looked like Hashimoto did pretty well, right? Like, which is a good example of why sometimes it's just not, the stars haven't aligned and you're not fit and you're not healthy. And if it had been 2 months later or 2 months earlier, you could have been the Olympic champion, but that's why the Olympics is so special. You have to get it right at the right moment. But it looked like he was, on incredible form. I saw his high bar routine, obviously took the gold medal, like incredible routine. So did those guys perform even though we're just a few months after the Olympic Games? Yeah, they all did really well. I mean, so with the kind of team competition, obviously they don't do all events, but I think Daiki, like after Paris, I was like, oh, like how's he gonna like even just like mentally recover from that? But he's back. he's all good. I think he had trouble in his floor routine in the team competition, but then all his other 3 routines were 14.9 or above. Right. And then silver on floor in the event final, did like the most difficult high bar routine that's been done in this code. In the event final, absolutely smashed it. So I think he's fine. Yeah. Which is awesome. Shinosuke, he was like drilling out the routines. He had some problems in the last couple of event finals. In the high bar final, actually, he hit his face on the bar. Oh, wow. Carried on his routine and then landed and was like bleeding everywhere. But other than that, like he was on form, looking really good. Takaki, Kaya, Wataru, like they all just like that. It seems like they're always on. Yeah. Which is kind of ridiculous. But I know these competitions are a really big deal in Japan. Mm-hmm. So they've had kind of some other domestic competitions in the last couple of months that some of them I think like withdrew from or didn't do so many routines or did like less difficulty. But for this one, they like were bringing their A game.
Yeah.
And they all look great.
Were there any trends in the skills they were doing that you picked out, Catherine, that might be in preparation for the new code, maybe a little bit different from what you've seen at the Olympic Games? Or were the routines pretty similar to what were being done at the Olympic Games? Because often when you watch certainly the Japanese competitions, right, you see skills that you don't normally see in gymnastics competitions. Was there any trends that you picked out that you could maybe say, okay, people are going to go in this direction a little bit more or not?
I think they were just doing the same routines with like, some of them were throwing in some like extra skills. Like I know earlier you were saying Shinosuke's difficulty is lower. So at the last few competitions, like domestically, he's been adding extra skills, I think, just to kind of try them out. Like in the high bar final, he put in a casino.
Okay. Is that what he landed on his face on, a casino? Or?
No, it was, he caught the casino. He was going nicely through his routine and then he hit his face on a Strauss Tkachev.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And not at this competition, but a couple months ago, he did a triple double on floor.
Oh, wow.
He did a Lucan on high bar. So he's like gearing up to add that difficulty in. And then, but I think they was like, because it's such a big deal, this competition, I think this is more like, do the routines we know we can do. I mean, like there were some amazing routines that happened that won medals that aren't going to work in the new code. So Tanagawa Kakero on pommel horse, his routine's entirely in flares. So he won the title there, but obviously he's going to have to majorly change his routine for the next code because he's only allowed to do a maximum of 4 skills in flares. And then in the high bar final, they were all just chucking upgrades left, right, and center. It was madness.
Yeah, I mean, I watched those routines that you had posted on your Twitter account. For anybody that hasn't seen any of those gymnastics, Japanese routines from the past weekend, please go to the MAGNASTICS Twitter channel because you've reposted them and they are just absolutely unbelievable. I remember when I was younger and I was still competing, it felt like Christmas every time that there was a Japanese competition and someone had posted some of the routines and you had to watch them fast because they get taken down within like 2 days. And so to see those routines was just incredible. And the high bar was it's breathtaking. I mean, they are light years above everybody else technically on high bar. It seems like they're able to adjust to the trend and new skills very, very quickly. One thing that's really interesting that came about this summer was I went to Ireland to do some coaching. So I went to the gym in Cork in Douglas and I came across a Japanese coach that was working there in Ireland. And this is the most overqualified coach I think I've ever seen in a club coaching recreational gymnastics. And I was perplexed. So I introduced myself to him and I was there for 2 days. And the next morning I said, "Are you a spy?" And he laughed and basically said yes. And I was like, "No way, this is unbelievable." And I was like, well, there used to be a guy that worked at Loughborough University and another Japanese coach, Takehito Morai, that worked in Essex. And my theory was that they were spies too. And he was basically like, yes, we get sent around Europe to send information back to Japan on new trends in gymnastics. And I was like, oh my God, he's just openly telling me all of this. It was incredible. And he was so intelligent and smart. And he was one of the Olympic coaches for Beijing and for London. And this guy's working in a club in Ireland doing the recreational side of gymnastics. I just couldn't compute. Why are you here? But apparently in Japan, what happens is once you get to a certain age as a coach, you're kind of not wanted anymore in the system. And what they do is they send you out and you go and coach in other places. It was really interesting talking to him. He actually gave me his email address because I said, hey, would you be interested in answering some of my questions if I ever have any questions for you about coaching? And he said, yeah, 100%. And what he did was he saw me coaching some girls doing some twisting and he came over and took out this piece of paper that folded in about 8 different ways and started to explain to me Russian technique, Japanese technique, and he was telling me why I was wrong, what I was doing. It was really interesting. So I was like, wow, I could definitely learn some things from you. So yeah, I think just that knowledge that they have over there, the depth, that's their massive advantage for me. We talk about in China, they have not as many athletes, but they throw all their resources at those athletes. And then in Japan, it's the depth of the knowledge that gets passed on, because every time we're seeing a competition in Japan or at the Olympic Games, all their coaches are past athletes. I don't think any other country does that as well as they do. It's always the guys that were competing 5-10 years ago, they're passing that knowledge on. They're just passing it on, and it's incredible to see, and that is certainly why I think they are, technique-wise on high bar, but all over the place, they are always very quick to adjust to the new rules. And it's just incredible to see. That level of high bar work for me was just amazing, and I just can't see how... where is the ceiling for that? Like, I just don't know. It's just unbelievable. And I really recommend people watching that high bar work. Could you tell us about maybe some of the younger gymnasts that you saw competing, Catherine, that might play a role in this next Olympic cycle that were exciting to watch?
So I guess the main one, speaking of high bar, is Tsunogo Tomoharu. So he ended up coming fourth. I think it was fourth in the high bar final with a 6.8 difficulty. So this kid's 18 years old. He's still in high school. So he was at Junior Worlds last year, and he, I think, won P-bars and high bar there. But I mean, 6.8, the hardest routine that had been done in the world before that was 6.7. And then that's his 6.8 is the hardest routine in the world for about 15 minutes till Daiki goes up. And like, he's got a Lukin, he's got a Casina, and he's doing all this stuff. And he hit every high bar routine he did this weekend. So that's 3 routines. I don't know if they were all that difficulty. I can't remember, and he's getting like 14.8 and above for all 3 routines he did in the weekend. So he's like solid. And in the team competition, he did all 6 events and he got like, I think it was 84.6 or so.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he's not he's not getting these massive scores yet.
Yep.
But he's, for all intents and purposes, still a junior. And I mean, because in Japan, they have this tendency to kind of, when guys are really good juniors, they hype them up and it's kind of hard for them to live up to it.
Okay.
So I don't want to be like, oh my God, he's going to like dominate everything, but his potential is like so clear. And I would expect him to start making teams in a couple years.
Okay.
Because he's strong. He's not so strong on rings, which makes sense because he's young, and also Japan kind of struggles a bit with rings anyway. But all around, he's very solid. Like, he's got really good floor. He's got good pommel horse. So I think I expect to see him making teams.
Yeah, it was very exciting to watch that routine and just see the level of difficulty he was able to perform, put into a routine at such a young age. I'm not quite sure how you do that, how you get there, what it takes to get to that level. It was, unbelievable to watch. And I think going into the next code, and we'll just touch on the new rules before we finish, Catherine, I think that I think over the past few years, we've started to see gymnasts' career stretch out a bit longer, right? With sports science and an understanding that recovery is very important, and the longevity of careers and the potential everywhere around the world for gymnasts to be able to make money and make a living doing gymnastics has meant that we're seeing gymnasts extend their careers a little bit more than in the past. I think that what might happen now with the new rules in gymnastics going from 10 skills down to 8 is that I think the juniors will be able to transition into the seniors a lot quicker, because they're not going to go from 8 skills to 10 skills. They're just going from 8 to 8. And I think what we might see is more young gymnasts on teams moving forward. So seeing like 17, 18-year-old superstars, and I'd be really interested to see how that potentially impacts, let's say, the average team age in LA 2028 and what that looks like in comparison to this year in Paris. I certainly think we're going to have some of those child superstar type gymnasts come out in the next 4 years. Do you think the same thing, Catherine? How do you think the reduction from 10 skills to 8 skills is going to impact the sport?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Obviously, like, that 8 skills to 10 is quite a big jump. So it'll definitely make that transition easier. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to kind of adjust to scores all being lower. Because like since we've been in the open code, it's just been getting lower and lower and lower every cycle. But yeah, I mean, from what I can tell, gymnasts are happy with the change, which is good. Yeah, and then it also puts a bit more emphasis on, I guess, the execution, because if the difficulty scores are all lower, that means that proportionally the execution's worth a little bit more.
Yep.
Which is something that I like. I like seeing the clean gymnastics. I mean, big skills are great, but you want them to be done well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to see, and I think we're going to see big dismounts, which is exciting for the people watching, right? Like, you know, not just seeing a back in full out of high bar or a double, you're going to start seeing triple backs, triple doubles. I think that's going to be exciting for people that are watching and fans. And I do think all that's going to happen, right, when you get to an Olympic Games and you've got the top 8 guys on each apparatus, they've all basically found the path of least resistance to give them the best possible chance of winning, which means that they're all going to cram in as much. All that's going to happen is we're going to do even more difficult gymnastics now, which is going to be super exciting. And I think it has an impact in different ways on different apparatus. You know, when I think about floor, you know, 8 skills, and from what I understand, the time is going to be the same on floor. Is that correct? Or are they reducing the time limit on a floor routine?
So the time limit's going back to what it was. So for this code, they increased it by 5 seconds.
So it's going to go back to 70 seconds.
Yeah.
So 70 seconds, but only 8 skills.
Yeah.
I think that's going to mean that you're not going to see as many gymnasts rushing through everything. They now obviously have to do a wide balance or an arabesque, which is a really odd rule to have put in.
It's so weird.
That's the most bizarre thing I think I've seen from the new rules, that one. But I think having chatted to Luke and Harry, what that's going to translate in just 8 skills on floor is you're going to see less combinations, because it's only worth doing a combination if the combination is a D to a D or a D to an E. And you're going to see bigger single skills, double straights, triple backs, triple doubles, all of that, which is great. I think it's going to be almost similar to women's tumbling in that respect. I think you're going to see most young gymnasts and a lot of gymnasts switching to doing a double pike dismount on floor until they're strong enough to be able to do a double or a double straight or a double straight full maybe as dismounts, and that maybe is what you're going to see. You're going to start seeing really big dismounts on floor as well. I think that's how it's going to impact floor. You obviously said on pommels, you know, you're not going to have as many of those routines just doing flares, so maybe more varied in some of the routines on pommel horse. Again, people just cramming in difficulty. You've got the combination of Son skills to Russian skills, and people are just going to be maximizing all of that. Rings is obviously going to change a little bit in the construction. I think speaking to Harry, he said you're just going to see the best guys doing the most difficult ring strength skills. You're not going to be able to get away with doing the lower strength skills. It's going to have to be the very difficult skills where you're doing landings to inverted crosses and all sorts of things, which will make it interesting, I think. And then vault's going to be vault. I don't necessarily think. I think we're keeping the 2 forward entries, which for me, I was confused at that decision anyway, because if you've got a great handspring 2.5, you could pick up a Dragulescu pretty quickly. I'd like to see you be a more varied all-around vault worker, and you've got a backwards vault and a forwards vault at least. So again, I think we're just going to see people upgrading those forward vaults, but you're going to see a trend of people still doing the forward vaults, 2 forward vaults, because they're the most consistent and easiest to land, because you can see the floor when you come round on that Dragulescu or the 2.5. Parallel bars is going to get quite interesting, I think. I like that you're seeing people maximizing like above bar skills again. So you're going to see people doing like Gatson skills, maybe double Diamidovs. I'm seeing lots of people trying to do that. They've downgraded some of those above bar skills. Healy's now a C. So I think it could make P-Wals quite interesting in terms of the skills that are getting done. More people doing double backs to upper arms again, because those deductions have come down. And then on high bar, I think high bar is where the code gets the most exciting, because they're upgrading skills like defs and Jaegers and more varied release and catches. We're still going to see people doing pagans, I think, upgrading those maybe Casinas to double twisting Kovac's, but big, massive dismounts. High bar is the apparatus where you've got the most room in the air to do the most amount of gymnastics. So maybe we're going to see triple pikes, full twisting, triple backs, triple doubles. So that's going to be super exciting. That's how I see the rules affecting those individual apparatus. Do you agree with that, Catherine?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only thing that's kind of like with high bar, with the limiting of like how many of each kind of skill you can do, I do feel like a lot of routines are going to look quite similar.
Okay.
Like it's great. I like that they're kind of upgrading like the def and things like that. I feel like we're going to see a lot of like Casinas, Coleman's, and then like two, so like straight Kachev, Ginger or something like that. I feel like, I don't know, I part of what I like about gymnastics is that it allows people to play to their strengths.
Yep.
So I kind of wish they weren't kind of going so much in the direction of like, oh, you can only do like two of this kind of skill. It'll be interesting to see how it all kind of works out. Hopefully we will see more like deaths. I mean, in the Japanese final, they were doing all that stuff. We had a Maris, we had a death. We had a Winkler, which was really cool. So they're upgrading that as well. So yeah, it'll be very interesting because it just kind of depends where people go with it. So I feel like when the code changes, you see a lot of people kind of trying stuff out, and then it all kind of comes together as people work out like the kind of ideal path through a new code. So like I feel like next year we'll see a lot of different stuff, and then it might, as people kind of find out what works for them, what scores better, might shift a little bit. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Just to finish then, Catherine, how do you see the landscape of men's gymnastics maybe changing over the next 4 years? Do you have hopes that it will become more of a popular sport? You know, globally, women's gymnastics is certainly followed a lot more. I don't think, you know, up until this point, we've not really had any superstars in men's gymnastics that people recognise that aren't involved in the sport, like Simone Biles. You know, my hope is that one day we have a superstar like that in men's gymnastics. Maybe, you know, one of the American athletes could be that going into the games in LA and transcend just the niche men's gymnastics community into the broader kind of public recognition of sports. I think that would be incredible to see that. You know, we spoke before that out in Asia, Kohei Uchimura obviously was, you know, a massive superstar, but you walk down the street, people don't really know who he is unless you're a gymnastics fan, right? So it'd be amazing if we could have that. How do you see gymnastics maybe changing over the next 4 years in men's gymnastics? You know, I've seen with the Platinum League that they're trying to do at the moment. It's quite cool, something a bit different. You're starting to see those online competitions and it gives gymnasts another revenue stream. How do you think things maybe might change in the next 4 years? Or do you think they won't? Do you think things are going to pretty much stay as they have, the status quo? What do you think, Catherine? Because I think we're in a new age, right, of the digital era where there are lots of possibilities. And, you know, if the right people make the right moves, it could really bring the sport into 2025 next year, because I do think sometimes we're a little bit too traditional and we're set in our ways, and it's a bit, and I like that, but I do think we need to get more people watching the sport because it's incredible, you know, it's so amazing.
Yeah, I think the online competitions are really great, even for just like giving gymnasts the opportunity to earn a little bit more money, because obviously if they don't have great funding, they're relying on prize money, which then leads to people like competing while they're injured or like competing so much they like wear themselves out. So that's nice, even from just like a perspective of like it's good to like for people to have that money as well. I think obviously Steven in the USA has got a lot more eyes on it. Hopefully that momentum continues. I think the format for Worlds next year doesn't really help, though, because it's maximum 3 per country and maximum 2 per event.
Wow.
Which is rough.
Yeah.
I think. Because normally that's when we get, like, post-Olympic Worlds is when we get, like, all the specialists are coming in. And it's like guys who are from big teams, sometimes that's their one chance.
Yeah.
And so I really don't like that format, and I don't think it's very good for the sport because it's really limiting the field, which is a massive shame. So like Steven, for example, he might be able to go, but if they want to send like 2 all-around guys, they don't have space for a specialist, or like if there's like, they'll probably want to send like, for example, Fred for all around, they might want to send like a specialist on a different event. So it's really hard to kind of see that, and apparently the technical committees weren't in favor of that format either. So I'm not really sure why it's happening. Right. But hopefully, like beyond that, like domestic events in America, obviously they're trying to save their NCAA programs, which is like a huge thing. I mean, I know in the UK, like a lot of people watch the gymnastics, and like you mentioned, like British male gymnasts, people kind of have heard of them, which is nice. I'm not sure I see like a massive change happening, but I think we're like on the way. Like I think steps are being taken.
Brilliant. Yeah, I would agree, Catherine. I mean, as a fan, just watching, just one more question I just thought of right there. As somebody that's a fan, not a former gymnast that's been in the system, right? I know that you've got a gymnastics background. What do you think that if you had the opportunity to chat to one of the, say, young British gymnasts, is there anything that you would be saying that they could be doing to help raise the profile a little bit more? Or do you think, no, you should just concentrate on the gymnastics? Or do you sometimes think, you really could be sharing your story a little bit more, or bringing people in, engaging people a little bit more? Maybe like somebody like Fred is doing in the US, right? Like, is there anything as a fan you'd want to see more from some of the current athletes that are starting to build their career and maybe have a following, did well at the Olympics this year, have got hopes of being in LA? Is there anything that you'd like to see more from those athletes as a fan that maybe brings the fan base along with them on the journey?
Yeah, I mean, obviously what Fred is doing and some other guys as well is really great. I know, I mean, for me personally, I don't watch that stuff that much because I just like watching the sport. But it does really get people involved. Obviously it has to work for the individual. Like obviously Fred loves it and, you know, he gets the results as well. And I think also like, I don't know where I was going now, sorry.
I think I completely agree as well, Catherine. Yeah. It has to be authentic, doesn't it? Because you can tell if you're just doing it. And you need both things. I always say to young athletes, look, results come first. You need the results. But it is important in this day and age, I think, with so many successful athletes. And in particular, when I look around the world and I follow other gymnasts in different countries on Instagram, there are so many athletes now with massive followings online. So you have to do something to stand out if you want to be able to go on and have a successful career that can support you through your career, but also help you into the next stage of your life. Because, you know, we're in a country now in Great Britain where, you know, the past 3, 4, 5 Olympic Games, we've had 50, 60 Olympic medalists. So no longer are you few and far between. You are just one of a lot of athletes that have medals, and you have to try and stand out if you're going to be, if we're going to see in the future gymnastics being one of the most popular sports in the country. I know it is at a participation level, but in terms of viewing and who's watching it and the eyeballs that it brings to the sport, rather than it just being once every 4 years and it being something that could be really, you know, we could see some gymnasts with household names in the future and a team of them. That would be really exciting. But Catherine, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. I love reading the articles that you write as well. I think they're really, really cool. I don't really see many other people doing that. So it's brilliant. Keep up the good work. If anybody wants to read some of the work that you're doing or just follow you online, where can they find you, Catherine?
So on Twitter, it's just at MAGNASTICS. And then my website where I post all the articles is magnastics.wordpress.com.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Catherine. Thanks for joining us today. And hopefully we'll chat soon.
Thank you.